You're listening to Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. Small town feel with big time ideas. After all, you are entitled to Brad's opinion. Here's your host, Brad Allard.
Hey everybody, we're here a little early. We're going to do a little special show about the events of last weekend and the attempted assassination of Mr. Trump and what I think the impact is and will be and some of the questions that came from that. I think everybody in the Western Hemisphere and beyond actually have seen it. I had a private message from a friend of mine that lives in Scotland, and she asked, well, what's going on? What do you see here and all this other stuff? So, it's a worldwide event. It wasn't just something that's going to shake up the race, but there's a lot of people around the world that are paying attention to what's going on. Taylor, where were you when you saw this?
I was at home.
Yeah, I was too. It was about 5:15, and I was watching, wasting time, whatever, flipping to the channel and said, well, might as well watch the news. And when I turned over to, usually I watch Channel 5, there it was, all this, going on. It just had happened. And that night, we were having a Sunday school party for a couple. They were moving to Tyler, a little going away party, and it was on in the background. And so we'd dip in and find out what was going on, what was being said. It was on, of course, constant loop with the scenes that you've all seen. And for us older guys, we remember other presidents and presidential candidates being shot. I remember Reagan in 81.
I wasn't alive then.
Hey, you weren't alive then. A lot of people weren't. I was a freshman in college, and I remember a young man comes running across the grass, across the yard, and said, hey, Reagan's been killed. And so we run into the Martin TV room. Back then, everybody didn't have their own TVs. You had one TV for the entire dorm down in the basement. Yeah. Had a room.
In the basement?
In the basement. I was right next to it. My room was right next to it. And it was probably about twice the size of the studio, so it wasn't particularly large. And there was about 50 of us there watching what was going on. Obviously, he wasn't killed, but I think he found out he was much more seriously wounded than we had been told several years later. When the books started coming out and the memoirs and whatever else, we did not know how close he was to death. And then, of course, when I was I think like 8th grade, a couple of women took shots at Gerald Ford. I have no idea what they were shooting at Ford for. He was one of the most inoffensive presidents we ever had. And then, of course, we know the other ones from our history. My premise for a lot of this is that we dodged a bullet, as Taylor has put in the title, because had Mr. Trump been killed, I don't even know what to say would be happening at this moment. We'd be going through some sort of civil upheaval. Oh, yeah. That'd make George Floyd look like a day at Sunday school.
It's like millimeters away from like Civil War.
Yeah. And it would not have been over with in a week. Nobody would ever accept that this wasn't deliberate. Nobody would ever accept that there was other forces behind it. And I had several people text or call and say, do you think this was a conspiracy, et cetera, et cetera? I'm not really going down that route. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But I'm just saying that they never would have accepted Mr. Biden as a second-term president. And it had been very, very difficult for the Republicans to have, on the eve of their convention, try to find a new nominee and gear up from scratch a new candidacy. And so had Mr. Biden won again, the country wouldn't accept it. You think that January 6th business about 3 or 4 years ago was intense. Extrapolate that across the country. That's what would have happened. Oh, spam calls right in the middle. Daggum it. Yeah, I know. Because they want to get a piece of the action here as well. So I'm going to do my sharing. We're going to bypass the sponsors because I think this is a serious enough show, and I think most of y'all are well aware of my sponsors. I would like to thank them briefly, but we're not going to go through the rundown. I'd thank you, Otto, at our place. Thank you for sponsoring the show for our place and for Gina's. Thank you for helping us out. Thank you, Wild Cigar, and all you do for us. Thank you to Gala and Southern Gym. I do remind you, even at the special shows like this, I still got to remember Commerce. They got a big sale coming up Friday and Saturday, so go check it out. Also, thank you to our friends, Two Maids, Brenda Ramirez. Thank you to Old Pro Roofing here in town with John Williams. And also thank you to Jeff Kelly, the Jeff Kelly Realty with the Wethington Agency. So They do all that, okay. And so I'm going to sit here and do this tedious thing of sharing with everybody. I think it's important. Anyway, I'm very reluctant to talk about it in conspiratorial terms because I do leave a lot of room for incompetency and the fact that one man with a rifle can change history. They are... a lot of conspiracy theories about John Kennedy, and I still believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, but it doesn't, the point is it's hard for us to accept that, that one man with a rifle could change history like it did, like the killing of Lincoln did, or the killing of William McKinley. I mean, a very underrated event. But anyway, let's just get back to Saturday. A lot of people are blaming Mr. Biden and his campaign for creating an atmosphere that led to some mentally maladjusted kid to do what he did. And I believe there's some basis for that. Now, people, some people I talked to said, hey, Mr. Trump has said many inflammatory things as well. And that's true. And, the question I posed is, if you believe that if this was caused by inflammatory language, would you also agree that January 6th was in part caused by Mr. Trump's inflammatory language on January 6th, and vice versa? If you're going to take, and they're trying Mr. Trump for this very thing, if you think Mr. Trump caused January 6th, is it possible that Mr. Biden and his rhetoric and his campaign's rhetoric and his administration's rhetoric caused some of this as well? And my answer is yes to both. Now, let's be clear. We have come to accept a level of inflammatory rhetoric in campaigns that maybe we shouldn't. But every time one of these things happen, one side blames the other, and it always based on what they say. Here's another example that may not be discussed that much. During the Obama administration, there was a congresswoman named Gabby Giffords who was being targeted, so to speak, by the Republican Party for defeat in the congressional elections. And there was a brochure or some flyer with Gabby Giffords' picture on the target. And then some nut shot her. She survived, but she still has disabilities from that event. And they blame Sarah Palin, who was part of her political group that put out the flyers and such. And so, and everybody was adamant that this was caused by this kind of inflammatory rhetoric. By the way, Gabby Giffords is still around. She's an anti-gun advocate, and her husband is one of the senators from Arizona, Mark Kelly. Anyway, that being said, is that quite often the media, in particular, when we have somebody from, say, the far right perpetrate one of these acts, they're very quick to say it's because of the atmosphere created by the rhetoric and the shouting and the inflammatory statements and the provocative statements and things of that nature. Should we not also hold Mr. Biden and his crew accountable for this as well? And the answer I have is, to some degree, yes. I understand campaign rhetoric. I understand free speech. But I also understand responsibility and how you label an opponent to a point where his election is seen as going to destroy the country, and some addle-minded kid or some other type of mental defective thinks it's been his duty to protect the country from this soon-to-be dictator. They've called Mr. Trump Hitler and made all sorts of statements about him being a fascist. And to be frank, sometimes the Hitler comments personally are very offensive, and I think out of line. But also, I think sometimes Mr. Trump will go too far. And I was afraid this would happen. I really was. I was afraid that something was going to happen to Mr. Trump because I just thought the way he's being characterized and the way some of his statements can be characterized as threatening or as fascistic or whatever else, and also the fact that sometimes Mr. Trump has been too loose with his mouth, I was afraid that something like this would happen. So let's kind of go over a couple of things. They have been labeling Mr. Trump an existential threat since 2020. Run video 1, please. This is during the 2020 campaign.
Wait, which one?
Number 1, the one that about the 2020, the first one we looked at today.
Okay.
I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America. He is a genuine threat to our core values, and he's a threat to our standing in the world. No president of the United States has ever, since the end of World War II, we built that Atlantic Alliance and NATO, ever threatened to leave NATO.
Okay, that's enough.
Never gone after our allies.
Let's do number 2 with Jerry Connolly, a congressman from Virginia. This is about last week even.
Donald Trump represents an existential threat to democracy. He's an authoritarian figure. He's the first authoritarian figure ever nominated by a major party in the United States. And we have to deal with that.
Do you hear
And
any of your
that's enough.
Republican colleagues?
How about number 3? This is Jen Psaki, his first press secretary.
Our view, and I think the view of the vast majority of Americans, is that former President Trump abused the office of the presidency and attempted to subvert a peaceful transfer of power, something that had happened between Democratic and Republican presidencies for decades and decades throughout history. The former president's actions represented a unique and existential threat to our democracy that we don't feel can be swept under the rug.
Okay,
and
that's
as President Biden determined,
That's
and
enough.
as we have provided.
I'm just saying they've been using that phrase all 4 years about Trump being an existential threat. And is he really or not? I don't think so. I really don't. It's not that I'm not a big Trump fan, so I hope you don't come away from this show thinking, I'm trying to get you to vote for Trump. You vote for him if you want. I'm just saying they have been labeling Trump this existential threat for, well over 4 or 5 years now. And it's ingrained into their conversation. It's a mantra they repeat over and over and over again. He's an existential threat. Now, there are American people that really believe that, and they're welcome to believe that, but they're not going to take up arms for it. But if you have the government of the United States and the media collaborating with this deal to say over and over and over again that he's going to be a threat, that we will not have any more elections after Mr. Trump last week or 2 weeks ago, Vice President Harris gets up and said, if we don't win this election, they'll be the last one we'll ever have, and that kind of thing. When you talk in such apocalyptic terms like that, you're going to incite violence. This is the thing that they accused Trump of January 6th, and I believe that Trump is partly responsible for that. He may claim he didn't, and that's fine. That's what one of his trials is about. Did he incite the crowd or not? And I think he already took a crowd that was armed and ready to go, and he, with a wink and a nudge, moved in that direction. And so we'll find out in a trial. But the Democrat Party's always claimed it's been the more adult party, and it's going to be the one that's going to save it and whatever else. We got our friend Otto here. What surprises me are some of the same folks that are outraged what happened to Mr. Trump were completely silent, not giddy, when Paul Pelosi, actually I was going to bring it up, but Paul Pelosi's really attacked when people were calling for the hanging of Mike Pence. The angry rhetoric needs to be turned down. Ben Nichols says, by the way, Doug Wright bought the Glass Research building that happened to have a ladder high enough for the kid to climb just 4 months ago through a parent company. I don't know who Doug Wright is, but it's okay. But Otto's point, I'm going to go back to that. That's my point I'm trying to make, is that this is not, I'm not blaming Joe Biden exclusively, okay? I'm not saying it's all his fault that this happened. I'm saying, though, we exist in a time now where people are very loose with their conversation about, doing violence. It's a disgrace to think that we should, go hang Mike Pence. And Otto's right. When all these people are, shocked and appalled about the violence visited upon Mr. Trump, they need to also remember, they need to be equally outraged when this is visited upon our opponents, their opponents. Okay, I'm not really thinking much about Paul Pelosi. I was thinking more about other, attempts, at violence. Some of the harsh rhetoric that some of the far right will throw out there on social media, and I read it. and this call to arms and all that, they're just making things worse for their own purposes. They may think they're warriors for justice, but they're doing it for their own purposes. All right? And so the rhetoric issue here, when I say it needs to be turned down, it's easy to say they need to start, showing some restraint. Well, it starts at home too. So I kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent, but thank you, Otto, for dropping in. I hope you do it again soon. Like, you can do the show some more. That'd be great. And as far as what happened on Thursday, what am I talking about? Saturday. What happened on Saturday was just prime material for conspiracy stuff, because how in the world did that kid get up there undetected? How did they get up there without any kind of being noticed by Secret Service? How did that place be available anyway? Let's run through that first clip. That clip on the that we had from the news last night of the kid that was being spotted by all the
Just making sure.
bystanders. Yeah.
Take a look at what happened.
Though stunning and unexpected. Authorities had already considered the gunman's rooftop perch a worry. Witnesses say they spotted a threat that day.
We're like, hey, man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle.
But the Secret Service had actually identified the building near the Trump rally as a potential vulnerability in the days before the event, according to two sources familiar with the agency's operations. But officials say no officers had been posted there. A key question is why. Today at the White House, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas said he expects within days to choose the head of an independent review from outside the administration.
I am committed to going externally of the department and externally of the government so that no question of its independence can be raised.
Secret Service officials say they had designated that local law enforcement would secure that building.
Any type of missteps that were made or miscommunication that was made has to be addressed.
Tonight, a major shift affecting independent candidate Robert Kennedy, who has been repeatedly denied government security.
The president has directed me to work with the Secret Service to provide protection to Robert Kennedy, Jr.
Today, the Secret Service director said while she had increased the Trump security detail in June, she has now made other changes since Saturday to ensure his protection.
I don't understand how that building could have been unsecure. I really don't, because you look at the schematics of it, the guy had a perfect angle. And had Mr. Trump not turned his head at the right microsecond, he'd be dead. And I'm going to address that kind of at the end, how this may impact not just the race, but impact Mr. Trump. But anyway, the point I'm making is that it's inconceivable to me that building was not secured. And the fact that almost a minute and a half before the shots were fired, people, the bystanders, were saying, hey, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle. And nothing happened. And in that very building that he was on top of, that was being used as like a base for the security by the local police. And so on the very building that they're, spending their time in, on the roof was the guy who was going to kill the president of the United States, or former president, let's be clear. And that just astounded to me. And that's why it's led to all this conspiracy business, that the CIA, FBI, the Secret Service, all these others, colluded with this. I don't believe that. I believe that we often mistake incompetence for collusion. I believe it's just very, very poor security handling. And I saw on another TV network on ABC, they had the interview with the head of Secret Service, and she said, well, we're going to do better and all this. Well, thanks a lot. Literally, we were micro inches away from a national catastrophe. Even if you don't like Trump at all, even if you despise Trump, his death would have been a catastrophe. All right? And, it would have, I don't know, it would have been a long, long time before we'd ever come back together as a nation, because a lot of the right in particular would never accept that this was an accident. And so the incompetence of the FBI and the Secret Service nearly cost this country dearly for years. And then we're going to have an investigation that ought to solve everything. That Homeland Security has been a total and complete catastrophe under Mr. Biden. Mr. Mayorkas is one of the worst cabinet secretaries we've ever had. You know, when he got impeached, I said, well, maybe that might be a bit drastic, but I can see why. Because he's done such a terrible, terrible job at the border, and then with these kind of things, with the chaos in the Secret Service. But anyway, as far as Mr. Biden's concerned, there was a nice interlude, at least. You know, he did call Mr. Trump and offer his best wishes. And Mr. Trump was asked about the call, and he said that Mr. Biden couldn't have been nicer. So at least we have that little reprieve of, you know, decency in it. But it's going to be very, very difficult now for the Democrats to move forward because they have based their entire campaign on two things: the abortion issue, which is totally separate from our conversation, and that Trump will end the country as we know it to be an existential threat. They use quotes that Mr. Trump has kind of thoughtlessly given to them about being a dictator from day one and all this other hyperbole. But he, you know, when you say things, you have to be responsible for what you say. This was last night with Mr. Holt. Mr. Holt asked about the rhetoric, and basically Biden will defend the rhetoric. So let's hear what he has to say.
Conversation this has started, and it's really about language, what we say out loud and the consequences of those. You called your opponent an existential threat on a call a week ago. You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there's very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that wouldn't accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win.
Mr. President, you've been in politics a very long time, so let's speak frankly. We're all adults here. Has this shooting changed the trajectory of this race?
I don't know, and you don't know either.
I don't know, but have you, something you've given thought to?
No, I've thought less about the trajectory of the case than two things. One, what his health is, that was secure, number one. And number two, what happens from here on in terms of the kind of coverage that the president and vice president and former president and new vice president.
Ashley Kirk Geisinger writes in, I understand there is concern about Democratic rhetoric referring to Trump as autocratic. However, isn't that a reaction to Trump's own rhetoric? Specifically, there are numerous instances of Trump threatening to jail opponents, telling his crowd that someone should take them out, making fun of Paul Pelosi, etc. I feel the expectation that Democrats not respond is unrealistic. I hope I made that point, but I'll reiterate that point to make it clear. Trump has brought a lot of this hostility upon himself with some of these kind of comments. My whole point of the show is not that Trump is innocent in all of this, by no means. I hope I've referred to the January 6th event a couple of times to make that point. Also, the fact that what Ashley talks about is true. He's talking about, you know, he going after his opponents and whatever else. And to have the Democrats say, well, gosh, I hope not, is not realistic. However, my point is also when you spend all this time, even before Trump was even a candidate for office, calling him an existential threat, it's going to have impact. Okay, so we're not talking about those mean Democrats are responsible for all of this, but they do have a share of the responsibility. It may be unrealistic, but that doesn't take away their part of the responsibility. And if they want to play in the mud with Donald Trump and throw back those kind of things at him, it's going to have an impact. Now, they have created with Mr. Trump this image that if he gets elected, he's going to do all these terrible things. And, you know, it's not hard at all to find statements in some of his comments and public speeches where they can make a case out of that. my point also, though, is that Joe Biden is the president of the United States. And, yeah, I understand completely. He doesn't mean, when he said let's put a target on Trump, he was talking in, figurative terms. Because, honestly, the last thing that Joe Biden would want is something like this to happen because of the impact it's going to have on his campaign, which I'll get to in a few minutes. It's not realistic to expect that the Democratic Party don't react to some of the statements that Trump made, but they have contributed to this mess as well. Okay? Like Otto mentioned in the first comment, it needs to be toned down. They've contributed to this mess, and I think that by this event happening inadvertently, they want to make it a lot harder for Joe Biden to be reelected, to tell you the truth. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I'm old enough to know that we've had these kind of statements that have been thrown out about presidential candidates before, but they always came from the fringes. They never came from the parties themselves. They never came from the media, because we didn't have social media in most elections I was a part of. There was always hyperbole that if Bill Clinton was reelected or elected in the first place, our country would go down the drain, or if Reagan got elected, he was going to throw grandma on the street. Hyperbole and amped up rhetoric is just part of the campaigns, unfortunately, and it has been in our entire history. We think of this now as kind of a current phenomenon. This has been going on in all our elections, it seems like, in our history. Some have been worse than others. I mean, the election of Lincoln, the election of Jackson, those, don't go back to my history teaching days, but those were particularly heinous elections. The election of Jefferson was grotesque in some of the things they were saying about each other. I think the worst in my historical readings was 1828, and I'm not going to get into all that, but it was just the things that were said were just beyond the pale. Well, and we're not really used to that. But social media's amped it up quite a bit because everything that some nut says on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, or puts out there on some channel, gets out there, it gets amplified and shared and all this other and goes viral. And so, but when it comes from the parties themselves, and it comes from the candidates themselves, it has extra impact. What will this do to the race? Well, I know in the short term, the Democrats have suspended a lot of the ad campaign. They had planned on during this week, during the Republican convention, to run a bunch of anti-Trump ads, and now that's been suspended indefinitely. It's not going to be suspended forever, certainly, but it's been suspended indefinitely. And it's going to put everything that Joe Biden says in a campaign event or Kamala Harris in a campaign event under increased scrutiny. They're going to have to be much more circumspect with their words, which is not a bad thing. Will Mr. Trump be more circumspect? I'll be interested to see that, tell you the truth. Every instance he's ever had, he seems like he just talks off the cuff and says things that really are beyond appropriateness in certain things. However, I was reading a couple articles today, a couple articles yesterday, that this apparently is really shaking him up. Mr. Trump is not an introspective man. He doesn't spend much time in self-reflection. But apparently this really has rattled his cage because he was telling people, I shouldn't be here. I should be dead. And a lot of Republicans are saying, that it was God's protection that kept it from being killed. He said it himself. He put out a very long posting on his Truth Social. He says, the only reason I'm here is because of God alone. Does he mean it? Well, we'll find out. Supposedly, he had a humdinger of a speech, as he called it, a rip-roaring speech that was going to, lambaste Biden on the Thursday night acceptance speech. And according to the news, and according to what he told a couple of reporters, he threw it away, and he wrote a much more conciliatory, unifying speech. So we'll see. Let's see what happens Thursday night. Let's see if he chooses that path as opposed to just spending 50 minutes ranting about Joe Biden. And people say, well, that's just politics. He doesn't mean it. He's insincere. Let's find out. If that is legit, and if the campaign on the Trump side takes a different tone, it's going to impact the Democrat side as well, because if they continue to react even if it's not from official sources in the campaign, if they have those supporters continue to react with this kind of existential threat business, a lot of people are going to see that in poor taste. And they're going to see that as, continuing to the problem and things of that nature. And the truth of the matter is that Mr. Biden, they've based a large part of their campaign on the protection of democracy angle, that we're here to protect democracy. And if that is neutered to any degree, that's going to hurt their chances. If they can't go out there and make a case without resorting to violent rhetoric or rhetoric that could be taken easily in the wrong manner, let's put it that way.
I've got a clip of him walking into the convention last night.
Oh, did you?
Shaking up.
Oh, I saw it. Go ahead, throw it in there. Let's see what it looks like.
I have audio on it, but you can talk over it.
It comes in. I don't think that was expected, but him walking in to that convention, I don't think that was planned. Comes in, he's got the bandage on his ear and all that. And I'm sure everybody says, oh, it's Donald Trump. No, they go nuts, as you might guess. I mean, they went crazy. He picked J.D. Vance as his vice president. That's another topic for conversation. I don't have a problem, Mr. Vance. I mean, he's fine. It isn't like I got any real issues. I would have preferred Glenn Youngkin, but that's just me. Back to what I was talking about. It's going to be really hard for the Biden campaign to make the case that he's a threat to democracy without using the type of language that could be taken by some mental defective as a call to arms. That's the whole problem. It's like we 99.9%, we understand. We not like it, but we understand that this is political chit chat, hollering and yelling that we've come to associate with campaigns. It's an unpleasant part of it. But not everybody is as mentally balanced as we are, guys. And sometimes you're going to, have somebody take it in their own hands. Now, again, I'm not blaming Mr. Biden for what happened Thursday night, or Ted going to keep saying that Saturday night. I'm really not. I'm just saying that we have created a culture that's been participated in by both sides eagerly, that somebody could take it too far like this. And like I told a couple of people, they asked me what I thought about this Saturday night, and we were at that party. I said I was afraid this would happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner, to tell you the truth. Now, will it impact the race? Yeah, it will, for a couple of basic reasons. One of the like I mentioned just now, one of the basic premises of the Democratic campaign was that Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States in every capacity. There was a big New York Times multi-article editorial about 5 days ago. I mean, it's like, I think Thursday of last week, or maybe, it was Thursday. And it talked about how Donald Trump is manifestly unfit for office. Okay, that's fine. And some of the things they brought in that article, or what we're talking about now, about some of his more loose statements and things like that. But how is it going to affect the campaign? I was reading one of the comments here. Is that when you have the President of the United States in his campaign, basing their campaign on, if you elect this guy, our country's over, this is going to happen. It's, the usual rhetoric is, if you elect this guy, he's going to ruin our economy, he's going to do this. Mr. Biden's also made a lot of these inflammatory statements before when he was vice president, claiming that Mr. Romney was going to put black people back in chains. I mean, that's very inflammatory language, and it's inappropriate language. He's done this before, all right? He did this in multiple campaigns, but that's just a side note. I will be interested to see what happens at the Democratic convention. They're going to spend 4 days talking about how Mr. Trump is all these terrible things. How are they going to phrase this in such a way that cannot be construed in any possible way as inciting violence? And if they spend 4 days talking about how he's going to end democracy as we know it, it's going to come under increased scrutiny. So what Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris are going to have, they're going to be under increased observation as to what they say. And here's another reason why I think that Mr. Trump is going to probably end up prevailing in this election. I did not think that 6 months ago, and I had my doubts even 3 months ago. I know what the polls were saying and where they were heading a little bit. But I just, I've been around here a long time, and there you are. Hang on, side comment here. Mr. Janish, Bill Janish says the two candidates only have to pander to a smaller fragment of the voters, the ones who are undecided. The core base will not budge. I won't, no matter what is said. Allowing illegals to vote is where Democrats will attempt to make up ground. I know in California there's a movement for that. I don't know if there's a nationwide movement, but what happens in California affects a lot of people. So that's another topic also, about the immigration issue. Here's the thing is the reason why I think Mr. Trump now is going to win is because the Republican angle is that Mr. Biden is not mentally and physically fit enough to be president anymore. And I want to show you some comparative videos that you will see, and comparative photos you will see in ads. Let's go to the first video on this, if you would, Taylor. No, well, yeah, this is the one. I'm sorry, I got it right. All right, this is one right after he got shot, and you see him standing up with the security around him, yelling, fight, fight, and then you compare it to this, to what happened, one of the campaigns. This is one of the campaign events with Mr. Obama. And he's being led off the stage by the hand by the former president. So you look at somebody that just got shot and he's yelling, fight, fight, and then you see Mr. Biden shuffling off the stage being led off like a 4-year-old. It's going to be in your ads, and it's going to make an impression. A lot of things about campaigns are visual. We always think about speeches and whatever else. Campaigns are mostly a lot of visuals in it. And, probably the majority of the visuals will last a lot longer than what was being said. Here's another one, photographs. Okay, this is going to be the photograph for this election. It's perfect for Trump. Blood on his face, defiant, American flag in the background. That's going to be the photo, and then you compare it to this photo after the debate of Mr. Biden being helped off a one-step stage by his wife. That is going to be a factor, is the physical fitness of the candidates. And here you got a guy that almost was shot, and he's yelling to fight, and he's got his fist raised, and you got Joe Biden being let off the stage. And, guys, it's going to have an impact on a lot of voting. And as far as Mr. Janish's contention about the smaller fragment of the voters, that's true. But the voters that I think are going to decide the election, I put that in quotations about voters, are the ones that stay home. And they're going to say, I don't like either one of them. The heck with it. Despite all this, what we've been talking about, I still think this will be one of the lowest participated in elections in the last few years. Well, 2016 was the second lowest in my lifetime. And I think it'll be close to that. Why? Because I think a lot of people don't care for either candidate and they're going to drop. Just say forget it. It's going to be those voters that may see these kind of images enough to move it one way or the other. Okay, I just want to sum it up real quick and make my point clear, because I don't want to be misconstrued also. I'm not exonerating Mr. Trump in any means for some of the things he said. This is a business about locking up his opponents and going after them and being a dictator from day one, even if he meant it metaphorically. It's it's a problem. Ashley has a comment here. Most people I know aren't voting for Biden, but against Trump. I will agree to that. I have a group of Democrat friends that I routinely poll to ask about their opinion, and I don't know any of them that are enthusiastic about Trump. There's about six I routinely, all 5 of them are going to vote for Biden, and one is just going to leave that part blank. But I don't know I don't know if any Democrats are going to change their mind. We're talking about a very, like Bill said, a small segment. But anyway, most people I know aren't voting for Biden, but against Trump. It is very entrenched, and many of those people are ideological conservatives. What is interesting to me is how little bounce Trump is seeing in polling after this. I would say only this, Ashley. The polls, immediate polls, are not really that useful because they don't have enough time to do a good poll. I'd say look next week about this time, and if there is not much bounce on that, then your point is correct. I don't think you're going to see a big bounce anyway, because like you're mentioning here, it's very entrenched, and a lot of people are changing mind. However, the polls I'm looking at aren't the national polls. There's about 7 I'm looking at, all state polls, and even a 1 or 2 percentage point difference there is going to make all the difference. So look at those. I'm going to look again next week about this time, and if you see a couple of points moving towards Mr. Trump in this election, that's a pretty good bounce. If they remain static, then that's also a point to be made. But any polls that have been conducted and being produced, like there's some yesterday on Monday, they were conducted before this event. And those snap polls are very subjective, so I don't really look at that. So again, Ashley, look in a week, and your point may be very well correct. We'll see. And we'll see how much the bump the convention gives him. Anyway, my summation statement, so to speak, is that I don't want to be seen as exonerating Mr. Trump and making him a martyr, but whether you hate Trump or love Trump or somewhere in between, thank God he wasn't killed. It would have been such a damaging thing to our country, and we don't need that, because most people don't live on the ideological fringes. They're center left, center right, in the center, maybe conservative, maybe liberal, but whatever. But they're not on the fringes, and we don't need to go through this as a country. Second of all, I'm not exonerating Mr. Biden either. You spend 4 years talking about him being Trump being an existential threat. It's going to have an impact on people with less control of their faculties, shall we say. And that, when Otto at the beginning of this said we need to tone the rhetoric down, yeah, we do. If you want to criticize Mr. Biden about this, that, and the other on his policies, or Trump about this, that, and the other, that's politics. Get used to it. I mean, Miss Ashley Geisinger says, yes, those are bad. By the way, most of my friends that are Democrats think Trump will win also. As far as the election campaign, I've been reading a lot about the morale, let's say, of the two campaigns, and the Republicans are fired up, and the Democrats are already pretty much conceding defeat, even within the campaign itself and within the White House, and it's going to be very hard for the Democrats to make a case for Mr. Biden when they have 24 members of Congress saying he needs to step down, and Nancy Pelosi's role in this. You talk about a Lady Macbeth figure. I mean, she actively is trying to get people riled up against Mr. Biden to step down. I mean, she's been making the rounds in Congress trying to get people to come out and speak, and there's several others that are doing it. But it's going to be very hard when to say, look, why should I vote for your candidate when 24 of your own party members say he's not fit and needs to step down? That's going to be a tough thing to overcome. Also, when you have a fired-up campaign, they'll go out and knock on doors when it's 95 degrees, whereas if you're not that enthusiastic, your morale's over, I'll let somebody else do it. I need to make a few phone calls. I'm busy. Now, morale is everything in a campaign. It takes money and all that, but it also takes a very dedicated, enthusiastic voter base. That's how Obama won. Two of the best campaigns I've ever saw in my life, objectively speaking, were the two Obama campaigns. They were well-run, well-financed, certainly, and they had enthusiastic support, particularly in 2008. That's, to me, probably the best campaign I've ever seen in terms of how you run a campaign. And he had just tremendous support. And that, given the events of Saturday and all that, the Republicans, I know, even the ones that aren't particularly fond of Trump, they are ready to roll. Now, maybe that's just here in Texas, but I'm just saying that does make a difference. And I'm also reading about that the money in the Biden campaign, there's like $90 million that's been suspended, so to speak, by some of the major donors. So a couple of donors have switched over to Trump because they think they see the writing on the wall. Maybe at a later date, when it gets closer, we can talk about the potential of a Trump victory and what that means. And honestly, there's some policy issues, not just his personality, but there's some policy issues that I have real problems. I hate that tariff, which Mr. Biden has kept and increased. But I think the tariff is terrible, but that's a side note. Well, anyway, to sum it up, here's my appeal to us here in the Burleson area, okay? Do not let these events impact your relationships with other people. The Democrat friends I have are dear people. They love America. They're Christian people, all right? They're everything that we on the other side, supposedly, and I say we because I usually vote Republican, even though sometimes it's been tough, particularly in the state elections. That's another conversation there, too. I do not care for Mr. Patrick at all. But the point is that we can't let these affect our relationships. All right, we can't let what goes on at this level keep us from having family and friends that are of the other party or the other opinion. You know, we have to remember, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, that the other side loves their country too, and loves their kids and loves their families and wants the best and all this other stuff. I don't care for the company of ideologues. And I don't care which ideologue we're talking about. So let's not let these things rip our communities apart. We've gone through this locally. You know, some of our elections the last 5 years or so have been kind of unpleasant, to say the least. And there's been some hard feelings. But eventually we kind of regroup. We don't need this at the national level. And I would call out even people on your own side when they talk about things in such apocalyptic terms or such violent terms. Okay? It's easy to call the other side out. Call it your own side. You know, when you see a Facebook posting that goes too far, it's pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and you have the same mind, call them out. Say, we don't need this kind of conversation. Social media is accelerating all this like gasoline on the fire. And so when you see this, don't let it go unremarked, particularly if it's on your own side, so to speak. And that's all I have to say about that. I appreciate you dropping in for a special show. Thank you, Ashley. I hope things are well. I see some of your Facebook postings about your daughter's competitions. I think that's pretty sweet. Otto, thank you for jumping in. Same Bill, same for Ben. Thank you, Taylor, for all the nimbleness on the computer. We got through this together fairly quickly. Put it together. I sent us some stuff last night. I put it together this morning, and I think it went pretty well. In about 45 minutes, I'm going to have the antidote maybe to all this. I have Polarosa Winery coming in. Yes, sir. With Donna and Dwayne Patrick over in Cleveland, so I'm looking forward to that show. You can bet, since they're bringing samples.
Same.
You betcha. I'll talk to you in a few minutes.